What if someone told you that the nearest U.S. state to Africa is not Florida, but rather one situated in the distant north? Or that, despite possessing 1/5 of California's area, this state actually commands greater coastline length? Welcome to Maine, a location frequently perceived merely as vacation territory for lobsters and lighthouses, yet it actually constitutes a geographic anomaly featuring extreme tides, extensive forests, and isolated boundaries. Here are 15 remarkable geography facts you never knew about Maine. Nearest state to Africa. Examining a standard Mercator projection map, most individuals assume Florida represents the closest United States point to Africa. However, due to Earth's curvature, the Great Circle Route, the easternmost United States point, Quoddy Head, in Lubec, Maine, actually holds that distinction. The distance from Quoddy Head to El Jadida, Morocco, measures approximately 3,154 miles. By comparison, the nearest Florida point to Africa sits nearly 1,000 miles farther. This fact perfectly demonstrates flat map distortion. Because Maine extends so far eastward and occupies a high latitude, the shortest Atlantic line creates a direct connection to the African continent's northern coast. It's a geographic peculiarity forcing us to reconsider our mental Atlantic Ocean maps. Greater coastline than California. This fact seems impossible given the size difference between both states, yet it derives from the coastline paradox. If you measure the general coastline, point A to point B, California is obviously longer. However, geography relies on tidal shoreline measurement, which traces the perimeter of every inlet, bay, island, and river mouth affected by tides. Maine's coast is a jagged fractal masterpiece carved by retreating glaciers that left behind thousands of rocky islands and deep, long peninsulas. When the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration traces the intricate outline of these features, Maine clocks in at 3,478 miles of tidal coastline, whereas California measures only 3,427 miles. This jagged geography explains why Maine has such a robust maritime culture. The endless nooks and crannies provide perfect natural harbors for lobster boats and windjammers that define the state's economy. The Old Sow Whirlpool. While whirlpools are often relegated to fiction or mythology, Maine is home to a very real and dangerous one, the Old Sow. Located in Passamaquoddy Bay between Eastport, Maine, and Deer Island, Canada, it's the largest tidal whirlpool in the Western Hemisphere and the second largest in the world. The whirlpool is formed by the immense tidal exchange of the Bay of Fundy. As the tide rushes in, millions of cubic feet of water are forced through a narrow underwater trench, colliding with opposing currents. This creates a gyre, which can form a funnel up to 250 feet wide. While it's generally navigable by large vessels at slack tide, small boats must avoid it entirely when the tide is running. The churning water also creates rich feeding grounds for marine life, making it a prime spot for seeing porpoises and whales from a safe distance. The most forested state. Maine's nickname, the Pine Tree State, is an understatement. It's the undisputed champion of forest cover in the United States. Approximately 89% of the state is forested, a statistic that actually has increased over the last century as abandoned farmland has reverted to nature. To put this in perspective, New Hampshire is second at around 81%, and the heavily wooded states of the Pacific Northwest don't even come close to Maine's percentage. This vast canopy is primarily composed of spruce, fir, and the iconic white pine. Historically, these forests provided the masts for the British Royal Navy. Today, they support a massive paper and timber industry. This density of trees also contributes to Maine's notably clean air and its status as a massive carbon sink for the Northeast region. A glacial desert, tucked away in the coastal town of Freeport, is one of Maine's most ironic tourist attractions, the Desert of Maine. Despite the name, it isn't a true desert. It receives plenty of precipitation, but it certainly looks like one. It's actually a 40-acre expanse of glacial silt, a fine sand-like substance left behind by glaciers 10,000 years ago. For years, this silt was hidden under a layer of topsoil. However, in the 19th century, the Tuttle family farmed the land aggressively, with sheep grazing and potato crops. This poor land management caused topsoil erosion, eventually exposing the glacial silt beneath. Once exposed, the silt began to spread like sand dunes, swallowing the farm buildings and trees. It remains today as a striking cautionary monument to the importance of sustainable agriculture and a window into the glacial history of New England. Predating Plymouth Rock. New England history usually centers on the Pilgrims, arriving in Massachusetts in 1620, but the French were in Maine long before that. In 1604, an expedition led by Pierre Duguay, Sieur de Mons, and famed cartographer Samuel de Champlain settled on Street Croix Island, located in the river that now separates Maine from New Brunswick. They built a settlement and attempted to overwinter there. Unfortunately, the location was geographically flawed. The island lacked fresh water and firewood and was cut off from the mainland by severe river ice. Nearly half of the settlers died of scurvy. The survivors dismantled the settlement the following spring and moved across the Bay of Fundy to Port Royal. Had the geography of Street Croix Island been more forgiving, New England might well have become New France. The first Eastern National Park. The American West is famous for its national parks like Yellowstone and Yosemite, but the East Coast lacked a similar federally protected landscape until Maine stepped in. Established in 1919, originally as Lafayette National Park, Acadia was the first national park east of the Mississippi River. Unlike Western parks carved out of massive tracts of public land, Acadia's geography was preserved through private philanthropy. Wealthy summer rusticators, including George B. Dorr and John D. Rockefeller Jr., purchased parcels of Mount Desert Island piece by piece to save them from lumbering and development. They eventually donated this patchwork of granite peaks and coastline to the federal government. Today, it remains one of the smallest but most visited national parks, beloved for its unique mix of mountain and ocean environments. Born from compromise, Maine's shape on the map has existed since colonial times, but its political existence as a state is the result of a national crisis. Until 1820, Maine was actually a district of Massachusetts, geographically separated from the capital in Boston by the state of New Hampshire. Maine gained its independence and statehood through the famous Missouri Compromise of 1820. At the time, the U.S. was bitterly divided over the expansion of slavery. To maintain the balance of power in the Senate, Congress agreed to admit Missouri as a slave state only if Maine was admitted as a free state. Maine's statehood is therefore inextricably linked to the prelude of the Civil War. Its geography was leveraged to temporarily keep the peace in a fractured country. The first sawmill. Geography is destiny, and Maine's destiny was written in its rivers and trees. In 1623, the very first water-powered sawmill in America was established in York, Maine. This was a revolutionary development for the colonies, which had previously relied on grueling pit sawing by hand. Maine was perfectly suited for this industry. It had an inexhaustible supply of white pine, ideal for lumber, and a coastline pierced by fast-flowing rivers to power the blades and transport the logs to the ocean. This early technological adoption set the trajectory for Maine's economy for the next 300 years. The Bangor Tiger lumberjacks and the river drivers that followed all trace their lineage back to that first mill in York, cementing timber as the backbone of the state. The Aroostook War. In 1838, the geography of northern Maine caused an international incident. The border between the U.S. and British North America had never been clearly defined after the Revolutionary War. When timber interests from both sides began logging the same valuable forests in the Aroostook River Valley, tensions flared. Militias were called up, and Congress authorized 50,000 troops for what became known as the Aroostook War, or the Pork and Beans War, named for the lumberjacks' rations. Fortunately, no combat took place. The conflict was resolved by the Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842, which finally drew the northern boundary we see today. It was a war over geography and resources that ended with a pen rather than a sword, securing the vast timberlands for Maine. The only one-syllable state. Maine holds a unique linguistic distinction in U.S. geography. It's the only state name that consists of a single syllable. While Utah, Iowa, Ohio, and Texas are short names, they all contain at least 2 syllables. The origin of the name itself is the subject of debate among historians. Some believe it derives from the French province of Maine, as French explorers were the first Europeans in the area. Others argue it was a practical nautical term used by English sailors to distinguish the mainland from the thousands of islands off the coast. Going over to the Maine. Regardless of its etymology, the punchy single-syllable name reflects the state's character. Distinct, straightforward, and efficient. The lonely border. Maine is geographically introverted. It's the only state in the contiguous United States that borders exactly one other state, New Hampshire. Every other state in the lower 48 borders at least 2 neighbors, Even Florida touches both Georgia and Alabama. This isolation is compounded by the fact that Maine is surrounded on three sides by foreign entities: the Atlantic Ocean to the east and south, and the Canadian provinces of Quebec and New Brunswick to the north and northwest. This creates a cul-de-sac effect in the American road network. You don't drive through Maine to get to another state. You can only go to Maine to be in Maine. This geographic dead end has helped preserve the state's unique culture and dialect, keeping it relatively insulated from the homogenization found in more central states. The empty quarter. While the coast of Maine is dotted with bustling tourist towns, the interior is a different world entirely. The northwestern quadrant of the state, often called the North Maine Woods, is the largest uninhabited area east of the Mississippi River. This area is largely comprised of unorganized territories. There are no mayors, no town councils, and no public paved roads. Instead, the area is a grid of private logging roads managed by timber companies. Visitors have to pass through checkpoints to enter. In a country where the East Coast is synonymous with high population density, like the Boswash Corridor, Maine's interior offers a wilderness solitude usually only found in the remote West. You can drive for hours on dirt roads here without seeing a house, a gas station, or a power line. America's sunrise. If you want to be the first person in the United States to see the sun come up, you have to be in Maine, but you have to know where in Maine. Because the Earth tilts on an axis throughout the year, the exact spot of the first sunrise migrates along the state's edge. From roughly October 7th to March 6th, the first light hits at the summit of Cadillac Mountain in Acadia National Park. Due to its height, from March 25th to September 18th, the honor goes to Mars Hill in Aroostook County because of its northern latitude. For the weeks in between, the title belongs to West Quoddy Head, the easternmost point. This rotating title is a source of local pride and tourist revenue, with hundreds of people hiking Cadillac Mountain in the pitch black of early morning just to catch those first exclusive rays. The blueberry capital. When people think of fruit production, they usually think of Florida oranges or Washington apples. But Maine is the heavy hitter of the berry world. The state is the largest producer of wild blueberries in the world, producing 99% of the U.S. supply. Unlike the plump, cultivated high-bush blueberries found in most grocery stores, Maine's berries are indigenous to the landscape. They aren't planted, they're managed. They grow naturally in the rocky, acidic glacial soils of the Downeast Barrens. These plants are incredibly hardy, surviving harsh winters and growing low to the ground. The harvest is a massive cultural event, and the industry is so vital to the state's identity that blueberry pie was designated the official state dessert.